G'day, ladies and gentlemen. I thought before telling you my stories of success and redefining it with solar power, I should introduce my yardsticks for success, who are my children. When I say yardsticks, I mean an imperfect measure, not exactly the standard that we need to hold to, but these kids remind me every day in big and small ways of future generations. And for me, when we talk about success, what matters is not the here and now, the profit and loss, the whatever in today's terms. It's what people many generations hence will say of us and our time here on Earth. And I'm going to explain to you 3 stories about that to try to get you to understand how important it is that we take that view, which the indigenous people of this place, Turtle Island, the North American Indians, called the 7th generation view, that every decision and action should be considered in light of what 7 generations from now will think we were doing back now. And it's throughout cultures, throughout time, we've had that perspective. When I did law at Australian universities, they talked about intergenerational equity as much as intragenerational equity. But we need to recalibrate thinking and reframe success to understand that view. So girls, thanks for being my yardsticks. Take a seat. So the 3 stories are going to be of progress, of a bit of pessimism, and ending with some optimism, and hopefully a happy story about solar power and success in our times. But the first one starts with the story of a silicon-based semiconductor invented here in America in 1954, which has been perfected in manufacturing terms in the late 20th century and begun to be scaled, and has become so commonplace that the service that it provides as a piece of hardware has become very low cost and affordable and almost ubiquitous. And I'm not talking about the silicon-based semiconductor sitting in your pockets in the microprocessor or silicon chip that has powered our information and computer technology revolution. Although it's a very similar story to that one, which you've learned and heard about Moore's law and the phenomenon of a manufacturing learning curve where every doubling of volume has led to a reduction in cost and an improvement in the technology and the service provided. Well, that has applied to the silicon chip and to the silicon cell, which is the heart of the solar panel or solar power systems. In my lifetime, it's fallen from $70 a watt per this graph in The Economist to 70 cents a watt. Because every time we build bigger factories, it becomes lower cost, and we keep building bigger factories, and the cost curves come down. And the system costs, the total installed cost of utility scale solar plants or rooftop commercial solar projects or residential solar projects on your home, they've come down through time too. And the electricity that comes out the bottom of the panel when the light falls on it and electricity is made has become lower cost too. And that's exactly the opposite, as you know, of what happens when the other way of getting electricity from the grid and behind that the fossil fuel kettle boiling business grows and grows. That becomes more expensive through time. All we know with electricity historically has been rising prices for a number of reasons: the transmission system costs, the infrastructure costs, but most significantly, the fossil fuels that fuel the steam boilers, because remember, this whole business of electricity is based around a steam turbine, which is basically a sophisticated kettle. And we're burning stuff, plant material from 200 million years ago to boil water to build Brownian motion up to a head of pressure enough to drive a turbine. And their costs have simply gone up through time, whereas ours, in the recent past, have precipitously come down, as I say, and we're now lower cost providers of the thing you and I value called electricity than coal, oil, nukes, gas, you name it, in many markets, in many places right now, which is great news. And as a result, our business is booming. The solar industry is growing gangbusters around the world. The company I started when I moved here from Australia to California in 2007 now has 700 staff down in Oakland, serving customers across the country. We have tens of thousands of happy families that have gone solar with us in 12 states. We're in Europe and Australia, and we, like the rest of the industry, are succeeding greatly. In fact, last year, 2014 in the United States, more solar power was added to the electricity grid than coal power plants or wind power plants. And that was true in 2013 as well. And that story of success goes global. In fact, if anything, it's going faster elsewhere than America, the home of the solar panel. In Germany, they really led the charge, and they have 35 gigawatts of solar panels on rooftops in Germany in a system of about 80 gigawatts capacity. The Japanese have also joined the fray, particularly post-Fukushima. The Chinese and the Indians, too, are doing more of this than us. In fact, the Chinese this year will install 18 gigawatts according to their plan. That's about 3 times as many as the United States will install. And last year they did 17 gigawatts, so I kind of think they can do it. The president of China, when he stood up with President Obama late last year, committed to 1,000 gigawatt build-out of clean energy in China by 2030. That is more than the US electricity grid's capacity that they will build in 15 years. So what it took us 150 years to do, the Chinese plan to do with wind and solar alone in just 15 years. So it's this amazing good news story with lots of benefits. You can imagine we're saving customers money, we're stopping the pollution from dirty energy sources, we're stopping the mining and the mountaintop removal and the fracking and all that stuff. But one of the co-benefits we very rarely talk about is the jobs we create. That the clean energy systems are necessarily more labor intense than capital intense, and even while the electricity costs less, it creates more employment. And that's a really big deal if you think about the 21st century and work and how we need more jobs, not less. And the solar industry in the United States is already employing more people than the coal industry in the United States. Just think about that. We're 2% of the electricity supplied in the grid last year. They're more than a third, falling from about 50% just a decade ago. They're shedding jobs as they go down, but they're the same number of employees across the whole value chain. Just the occupation of solar installers, we have more of than coal miners in America. And that can't be understated in terms of a wind behind our sails, the political will that that breeds when this energy technology is seen against the incumbents. It's lower cost, it creates jobs, it strengthens the grid, etc. And up against coal, oil, and gas, we're going to generate 8 times as many jobs in America this year as those technologies combine. So we're winning. And if anything tells that story, it's this slide. And apologies for the eye chart, but Bloomberg's done a very good bottoms-up analysis of all the additions to global grids around the world in the last 15 years. And as you can see, we started the 21st century much like the 20th century, where 80% of everything being added, wherever it was coal, oil, nukes, or gas. But after that, we basically chose as a society, and I don't know whether it was subconscious or not, but to phase that out, to diminish annually the amount of new additions to the grid and to increase the clean energy additions. And in 2012, the lines crossed. And every year since then, and from now and forever, more clean energy, particularly solar, will be added to the system that provides electricity for us than dirty energy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is such a good news story that I wore my sunglasses out here, but I couldn't see you if I put them on, because the future of the solar industry is very bright. That's my first story. My second story is one where I introduce a little bit of the fear in my heart. The story I don't normally tell to a crowd, I'll be honest, because it's about why I do this, which is to reduce the carbon emissions from our energy systems into the atmosphere. This is a very important problem facing us. And if you look at this graph, and again, apologies for the eye chart, you can see in the 3 markets that my company, Sungevity, operates in, Europe, Australia, and America, we're struggling with reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And some ways we're doing okay, but we need to do more. Just to walk you through it, the Europeans have managed to keep their emissions below 1990 baseline levels, a kind of benchmark year, because of their efforts with clean energy largely. The Australians have dipped above and below the line, and the US is only just starting to get in the right trajectory. The point for me, though, is the bars at the end of the graph in 2030 represent where we need to be, just 15 years from now, in terms of carbon concentration in the atmosphere. The lighter bar is kind of a loosey-goosey, kind of fuzzy maths projection, and the darker bar is probably more accurate according to the science, that we need to be between 40 and 50% of our carbon emissions in just 15 years. And if you take out the dotted lines, you project them forward, those are the targets that we've set as countries for greenhouse gas emissions, you can see that we barely get there. You know, like the Europeans might just touch on it, and you know, if we really do our damnedest in Australia, we can get there, but I don't trust the current Australian government to do that. So the curves aren't quite achieving the change, let alone for the rest of the globe. And that worries me, because the point of the bars at the end of the graph, where we need to be, is a soft landing for society 7 generations hence. If we go beyond those concentrations, we're committing to a 2 degrees rise in temperature. And if you think the current California drought's a doozy, with a 1 degree rise in temperature so far, take it out 2 degrees or more, and we've got real problems going forward. Putting that problem another way, here's the electricity grid represented by Bloomberg, who provided the first 15 years of the century for the next 15 years. And basically on stage right over here, you've got what we had as a grid globally, 5,500 gigawatts, and what we will have globally in 2030, 10,500 gigawatts. Forget about the numbers, you know, they're projections, they could be wrong, they could be bigger, they could be smaller. GE thinks there'll be more. The point is, we're about to double the electricity generating capacity on Earth in the next decade or so. And that's because we're bringing 1 billion people in Africa and India and elsewhere into electricity service and so on, and we're going to electrify vehicles, and we all grow our demand with all our gadgets and all the rest of it. And clearly, the renewables portion of this is growing. Like I said, like a weed. You know, solar is going to go from 2% of a small pie to nearly 20% of a big pie. But if we do what we need to do to reduce that carbon emission and phase out those fossil fuels at the bottom of the graph in the middle, faster, further, forever, we need to do more like 2 terawatts of new additional capacity, not 1 terawatt by 2025. So there's sort of this missing amount here, which is what my industry has to deliver if we are to succeed in the terms that I set up at the start of this. So, humph. Deep breath. Sorry, I know it's pretty stark, but it's what I live with. The story I want to tell you to finish is the story that I actually hope is told in the early 23rd century by the 7th generation. The one that they write up, because they will be here, there will be people here no matter how screwed the climate is. And they will tell a story, and I want it to be a story of a generation that stood up at the start of the 21st century and said, we can do this, we've got this. We understand the science, we understand the technology, we have it in our hands, the politics can get behind it. We can create an abundance that we don't currently enjoy from our energy system, which pits us against one another with a system of scarcity and fossil fuels. And we can do better than that. And we take that challenge, and we reach inside ourselves, and we do twice as much. We do 2 terawatts, not 1. That's 2 million megawatts, not 1 million megawatts, which makes my colleagues in the solar energy industry freak out and faint for the scale and pace of it. But that's the scale and pace we need to move and change. And we dig deep to become that. And in particular, we tap not just the technology, but the benefits of it to spread the power to the people literally and figuratively. Because this distributed architecture that is innate in solar panels, the modular nature of it, allows local ownership and local control as well, which means it will spread faster and bust the trusts and the regulated monopolies and the vested interests and the friction that stops us from making the change in our energy system currently. And in particular, I want the entrepreneurs of the Greater Bay Area where we stand today to lift themselves up and focus on this problem set, to use their collective genius, not to create another drone technology to deliver $2 razors to your door, or to create another way of sharing photos on Meerkat instead of whatever it's called, but rather to use all that intelligence and the information and communications technology to make this distributed energy system work and be able to deliver the service of electricity to the people that need it, not just here, but the billion that have yet to even experience electricity on Earth today, and the billions still to be born that need and deserve electricity. And if those entrepreneurs stand up and are counted in this challenge to take on this task, then they can enable everyone's superpower, because that's what we're talking about here. When the sun shines sunshine falls fresh from the sky on your head in the morning, it's really a kind of superpower. You don't have to rely on the man and the boiling of water by burning some fossil fuels that are really plants that took up sunlight 200 million years ago. You can tap it direct, straight from the source, organic, like the good food that we like here in the Napa Valley. And those entrepreneurs can enable every woman and every man to have in their hands that superpower, which is why I built the SfunCube with a friend, an Incubator and Accelerator in Oakland, which supports solar entrepreneurs to do exactly that, to build businesses that do more than just do well. These are businesses that do good, that have legacy, not just an exit. And if we can do that work, then I think that that textbook written in the 23rd century will not have a passage in it kind of like, you know, the way we describe early hominids moving from being just monkeys to fire monkeys, where we captured the power of fire to use it to light the cave and ward off predators, and then to capture nutrients by cooking food, and to ultimately boil water to drive steam and steam turbines. But you know how that paragraph in it's probably not the history textbook, but the biology textbook is sort of very loose, and it's kind of like sometime back in the early days of humanity that happened. I want the 23rd century textbook to read that we, the millennials, the X, Ys, and Zs, or whatever we're called, this generation in the first half of the 21st century, turned us to that next evolutionary phase to stand up and become sun monkeys, where we take the power straight from the source, the solar energy itself, we cut out the middleman, fire in a wire with no smoke, no burning of anything required, so that future generations can look back at this not as a golden age where we just made more money and did well for ourselves, but as a sunshine age where we really brought power to the people and achieved something which changed the course of history to abate the climate change that otherwise would be our legacy. I want you to join that rooftop revolution, join us, go solar, become a solar entrepreneur, lend your shoulder to turn that wheel of creative destruction so that we can all shine on. Thank you very much.